Hi, everybody. You have Donnie from Eterneva here. Welcome back to our amazing partner Instagram live sessions. Today, I am overjoyed to have a really amazing guest with us. We here have Michael Hebb from Death Over Dinner. For some of you who don't know, Michael Hebb is absolutely famous in the grief and death space. He's done some amazing work in pushing the death positivity movement forward, and just really wanted him here today to speak a little bit about the work he's been doing. And, you know, how fast the landscape is changing is kind of taking all of us by surprise. So thought it'd be a good day to, sit down, have a candid conversation, and just see where we can go together with all of this. So Michael, would you like to introduce yourself, tell them a little bit about Death Over Dinner and what you're doing?
Absolutely. I'm honored to be here and spend time with this community. As you know, Eterneva, I think, is one of the most extraordinary things happening in this space. And so it's great to chat with your folks. So Death Over Dinner started 8 years ago in a very different time. And not just a very different time from COVID, but a very different time in American culture around death and dying and grief. The conversation about end of life, the conversation about our mortality, about dying well, about even, grieving, was not front page news. And it seemed very important when I learned personally that people aren't getting what they want at the end of their lives. And I think the statistic that 75% of people want to die at home and only 25% of us do, that half of America wasn't getting what they wanted, was what inspired Death Over Dinner. We realized that what was standing in the way of people getting their wishes fulfilled during, the most important, or one of the most important transitions, events, experiences of your life. There's birth, there's weddings, there's graduations, there's death, and having children, etc. But we created Death Over Dinner as a way of giving people a beautiful, warm, gentle, inviting, way to have this conversation about end of life. And it was also meant to wake people up.
Yeah.
That's why we use the word death in the title. We hit a nerve internationally for sure. And everything has changed. Death is front page news, not just because of COVID, but prior to this, the good death movement, the dying well, et cetera, has really become a focus culturally. And we've had over 1 million people sit down and use our resources and have this conversation. And we could go deeply into that. There's, medical communities and clinicians at Cleveland Clinic and Memorial Sloan Kettering that are now having this conversation using our tools. But it's been a remarkable 8 years, and I've talked to thousands upon thousands of people about their end-of-life wishes.
Wow. That's truly impressive, I think, just on its own to have reached that many people at this time. So really cool to hear things like that. There's something so much so deeply rooted in your work, I think, and it's probably because it's related to food and dinner, that is around rituals. And something that this is very familiar to us here in the grief space is that Americans in particular don't necessarily have the most set rituals around death or rituals around grief, and maybe that is part of why those conversations have kind of gone under the rug for so long. What have you seen in your kind of ritual work and research that's worked really well for Death Over Dinner?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things here. You're right. We have a deficit of ritual. We've moved away from faith-based rituals. A lot of people have, many people still have them intact. I think even faith-based rituals have become less prevalent within faith communities. And so there's a great forgetting that has happened around ritual, almost like the same forgetting that happened around people cooking for themselves or growing their own food. And with and talking about death, quite frankly, when we have these loss of literacies around death, ritual, food, et cetera, we end up having a loss of empowerment. Literacy leads to empowerment. And so we're not able to say what it is we want and to get it. And so, ritual for us dinner is one of those rituals that luckily never went away. 20 meals are eaten in the car in the United States, and many more now. I think most meals are probably eaten on a couch or something. But we've had to relook at our rituals during the COVID era. For instance, with Death Over Dinner, it's always been the case that we would have people, be surprised by the questions at the table. A death dinner just is a group of people sitting together and responding to some conversational prompts with a couple rituals at either side of the dinner. And we really like the impact of holding on to the questions and then kind of surprising people with them. And we changed that. We did a virtual death dinner for 50 people in breakout rooms on Zoom. So powerful. It still works. But we gave everyone the questions beforehand. And we wanted people to not be surprised, to be able to think about it. There's enough going on in the world of surprises. And it just, a lot of the stuff that was built in the last 10 years around death literacy was built for a culture that denies death, not one that's immersed in it every day. So myself and a lot of, the leaders in the end of life space, we're having to look hard at what we are saying are good practices, and what can be very helpful to people. But we can talk more about rituals if you want that can be helpful besides death dinners.
I mean, that I feel like what you're saying is so closely linked, like rituals with the literacy of it all. Like that's what's so interesting about this is your death literacy and like the way you approach this change now because we're moving into a virtual space. And I basically ask this because like as movements, we've been trying to help spread what these rituals can look like or how we can cope in new ways. And I feel like that's even changing right now with everything moving to an online space. And we're also kind of rolling with it too. So I guess like from that perspective, I'm fascinated to see like, do you think that these rituals have to kind of be repurposed? I would love to even know like how people in this space are approaching this monumental shift essentially.
Yeah. And ritual is a tricky word. It is triggering for a lot of people. It's very it's very much misunderstood. Mm-hmm. And so I think just giving a little background to people, and some people are like, yeah, I've been building altars for years and I pray and et cetera. But I always go to Joseph Campbell's to what is ritual? Why is ritual?
Yeah.
And he's an incredible mythologist and historian and writer. And here is one thing that Joseph Campbell said. The function of ritual, as I understand it, is to give form to human life, not in the way of a mere surface arrangement, but in depth. And especially now when everything has changed, these basic rituals or tent poles, there's actually this idea that when you do a ritual, you create an axis mundi. You create order in the universe by saying, this is the center of the universe where I'm enacting this ritual. And, that's a longer conversation, but even making a joyful noise for healthcare workers. There's a ritual to observe the ninth, the website called observethe9th.org, to take a month or a day each month to really observe the collective grief and your individual grief around COVID. There's also, it's kind of more tongue-in-cheek ones like Jimmy Kimmel. What they're having the idea to have formal Fridays that he's doing with his wife, or date night, right? These things are rituals. Prayer is a ritual. People that have never prayed before, people have never built an altar before, are realizing that creating that kind of time and that intentionality does give some order and meaning to the chaos. And there's a reason to practice these things. Not just, there's the basic function that it reduces your cortisol level. Like it reduces stress to pray. It reduces stress to light a candle on a certain time each night and, think about your loved ones that are no longer here. To make a joyful noise. Like we know that physiologically, it helps us in the moment. But the other thing is rituals become more effective and impactful the more that we do them. So if we don't know how long we're going to be in this new normal. And there's a good chance you won't be able to be at a funeral of a loved one, or at the bedside of a loved one who's dying. You won't be able to have, best case scenarios. And it will be very helpful to have some of these rituals in your life as a way of keeping some sanity and some healing instead of just a spiral, right? To create some lift, some order, some moment and intentionality. And they're awkward. Rituals are designed to make us feel a little bit uncomfortable because we are surrendering to something larger than ourselves, right? So you might feel ridiculous, doing the morning dance, share your dance with your friends, or doing, there's all of these different things that are happening. Mm-hmm. But the psychological thing that is happening for you is you are surrendering to something that's greater than yourself instead of trying to control it, which is literally, those are the colors in the rainbow we need right now.
Yeah.
Right? We can't control this shit.
I think that was like an amazing part of this conversation I had with Dr. Candy Can as well, is that it is about that moment to pause and to realize, hey, this has happened in history before. This is, not only are we not alone right now, like we're not alone in the bigger scheme of things. We're not alone like in the last few centuries. And it's kind of been like, I think what I've seen it as is kind of a moment of awakening. Like people are kind of realizing what's important again. They're realizing we're missing connections. And so that's why it's fascinating to see all of this kind of come to fruition overnight. And by overnight, I mean, it's been happening for decades before, but maybe now there's a little bit of a spring or a pop, like of this movement essentially.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's a terrible thing to have your work be needed and desired because of a tragedy, right? Megan Devine and I have talked about this, about, we've been shouting from the mountaintops for years, right? Do this work, do this thinking, get to know your loved one's wishes, get deeply into your grief and understand it instead of just repressing it, and now the world is turning and saying, please, we need it now. And it's like, this, it's hard to have the work appreciated in a tragedy when it was actually designed for normal times, but here we are. Exactly.
And I think something I read a little bit in your work and in works in general is the things with rituals, that there's two interesting components to them. One of them is essentially like preparation and repetition. It's something that you prepare for and repeats itself. And also when that ritual happens, it requires presence and holding space in that moment, like what you said, surrender. So it's something really fascinating about them, where it's, fear can maybe be taken away if you actually allow these thoughts to come to your mind and maybe plan for them. And then once you have those moments, like you held space for those challenging questions, those challenging conversations. Do you feel like that's a lot of that's a lot of what I think drives Eterneva and what we're doing. You're right. We want to prepare people, but we also want to make it a conversation that extends all of this. Is that some of, what Death Over Dinner and your other end of life work is trying to achieve? I would love to hear more about your philosophy there.
Yeah, well, these ritual and Death Over Dinner, it is about creating resilience.
Yeah.
For sure. It is also about, and I think Elizabeth Gilbert speaks about this really beautifully, the idea of transmuting fear into intuition. Mm-hmm. And so instead of being up here with fear coming down into our bellies and listening to ourselves, right? And that's when you do deep belly breaths, that's what you're doing. You're actually getting into, whether it's chakras you align with or Chinese medicine, or you can use any modality, or trusting your gut, right? You don't even need to have any woo in your understanding of the universe to realize that getting into our intuitive space, getting down into our bellies is a way to address fear instead of being motivated by fear. And so our bellies and our intuition and those deep breaths, that's all about knowing ourselves. That's, what Joseph Campbell was talking about. We know ourselves through knowing our place in relationship to things that are bigger, but to get to that quiet voice inside and to start to trust that and to feed that and spend time with that, which ritual does for us, and dinners and creating space, etc., there is less room for fear. And then also a strategy. So many people feel fear and don't know where it's coming from. That's hard to have the awareness to go back to what the root is, either in the moment or psychologically. It's hard work. But then also just have a strategy of how to transform it so it doesn't loop and, spiral and persist. And there's so much great work that's being done, out there with so many healing practices. So that's what they're trying to do, get us in touch.
That's definitely like another huge space and conversation, but and probably for another time, but so relevant because what you're talking about, it feels like these themes I've been hearing over the past month as we've been doing these is that it is about awareness and acknowledgement. And that's maybe going to help us take steps into accepting the world that we're in, accepting that we're not in control of it, which is why this COVID thing is kind of like a zeitgeist in its own sense. It's forcing us to pause and maybe possibly acknowledge that we've been forcing or pushing things maybe in the way that's not working for us right now. At least I felt that by this past month of self-reflection and quarantine, but I'm curious as to what they all think too.
Yeah. Well, one point people are asking what is different about this time and end-of-life conversations and to have those conversations because, Eterneva is about people identifying how they want to be memorialized, how they want to be remembered, how they want to be honored. And when people do communicate that to their loved one, it's a gift in the fact that their loved one's grief will be more meaningful and it won't be as long and it won't be as deep if we know how to honor our loved ones, right? And so the trick is finding out how they want to be honored. And that's always hard. It's actually more hard right now because people are in fight or flight. It's not like because we're facing COVID and we're all having this great death crime and we're all, maybe our priorities are shifting. This is not an easier conversation now. It's a better conversation. You need to be more gentle. You need to listen more. You need to be thinking about the other person more. The only thing we have going for us, and this will change down the road. It'll be like COVID inspired many things, but we're in a lot of panic right now. But the one thing we have going for us right now is what you said. This is collective. It isn't, Mom, you need to get prepared. You need to have this conversation. Dad, I don't know, these shoulds, I need to know what your end of life plan is. No, we all know we need them.
Yeah.
As a family, there's a great excuse to get prepared. It's a great excuse to get the 5 wishes done or to have a death dinner or do the conversation project. All of these incredible resources. You don't have to have a directional conversation. It's completely reasonable to say, hey, group of friends, if maybe family sometimes harder, but let's all get prepared. Let's take a Friday night and let's open a bottle of wine and let's get on Zoom and let's do the 5 wishes together, right? That is much, if you said that 3 months ago, people would be like, you have an agenda. That person that always talks about death. Now they'll be like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Scary, but I'm in.
Yeah, 100%. And to anyone who hasn't looked into Death Over Dinner or doing one of these dinners, it's absolutely phenomenal. So mine doesn't count, but I did have a virtual seder, Passover dinner with my family over Zoom. First time ever doing that. And that conversation did come up for once in a very open way. And it does seem scary to broach at first, but I definitely recommend what it does for relationships, it it rehumanizes, I think, us to each other, that it is, you know, everything is kind of impermanent, you know, and out of our control. So I highly recommend it. Michael, this has been an incredibly like deep and also inspiring conversation. Definitely given us a lot to think about. I would love to end this on, I think, a really beautiful note. You sent some amazing pieces earlier over email that I thought were just so great and timely. I would love if you could read one of them to us, just to leave people something nice to take away from this too.
Of course, I will. And one thought before I do that, you mentioned the Seder.
Yeah.
The Seder was actually is a digital response to not being able to gather.
Wow.
Seder was created because the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, and they couldn't have Passover as a gathering. And so they distributed it into people's homes. And so we're doing, you know, that's what Death Over Dinner was inspired by, this distributed, you know, and I'm not even Jewish, but I was like, you know, that is an incredible idea and response. So Zoom is like the new Seder in some ways, people that are using it well. So yeah, I sent you this a short passage from a beautiful piece about a call for the imperfect during this time. It's from Elizabeth Renzetti, and it showed up in the Globe and Mail. And so I'll close with just these 2 paragraphs. I'm not going to suggest this crisis as a silver lining. Not when medical workers and shop staff and home care assistants are out there putting their lives on the line, and people with the virus are dying afraid and alone. There is no silver lining, but there is a rare opportunity to see how behavior changes when it is challenged by a new and terrifying threat. It seems to me that we've quickly, but perhaps only temporarily, lost our appetite to strive for perfection. I find myself perversely heartened by the anti-Instagram world now on display. The messy bookshelves and Zoom calls, the misshapen sourdough loaves, the gray roots, the clueless spouses wandering around pantsless, the wonky pets. It makes you marvel at the energy we spent maintaining the illusion of perfection in the first place.
Oh my God, y'all, if that doesn't hit home, I don't know what will, but Michael, thank you so much for joining us for this session. It's been truly special for us. Would love to do it again with you guys. For anyone that doesn't know, this has been Michael Hebb from Death Over Dinner. Go check him out, Instagram, Facebook, online at Death Over Dinner. Truly amazing organization. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful week.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.